Doctor humiliates black nurse in front of patient, unaware of who the patient really is. The morning in the hospital began like many others. The hallways were filled with the quiet sounds of rolling carts, the beeping of machines, and the hurried footsteps of staff trying to keep up with the long list of patients waiting for care. Nurses moved from room to room, checking charts, offering comfort, and giving medicine, while doctors prepared for their rounds. It was a place where every person mattered, no matter their role, because lives depended on teamwork. Among the nurses working that day was Nurse Angela. She had been in the hospital for several years and was known for her calm presence, her warm smile, and her ability to keep both patients and staff at ease. Patients trusted her quickly, because she always spoke to them with kindness, explaining things in simple terms and making them feel seen as people, not just as cases. For her, being a nurse was more than a job. It was a calling. She had chosen this profession because she wanted to help people in their weakest moments, to give them comfort when they felt alone. That morning, she was assigned to assist Dr. Robert, one of the most senior doctors in the hospital. He had a sharp mind and many years of experience, but he also had a reputation. Some of the staff whispered that he was difficult to work with. Others said he often spoke down to people, especially those he thought were beneath him. Still, because of his knowledge and skill, the hospital valued him highly, and many tolerated his behavior just to keep the peace. Angela had worked with him before. She knew his ways. He rarely said thank you, often interrupted, and sometimes raised his voice when things did not go exactly as he wished. But Angela, being the professional she was, never let his attitude affect her work. She focused on the patients. She reminded herself that kindness and patience mattered more than ego. That day, Dr. Robert and Nurse Angela entered the room of a patient who had been admitted overnight. The patient, a man in his late 60s, sat up in bed with quiet dignity. He wore the hospital gown and had a chart clipped at the end of the bed. He seemed alert, his eyes following every movement as the nurse and doctor entered. Angela offered a polite smile and greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. "How are you feeling today?" The patient smiled faintly. "A little tired, but better than last night." Angela nodded and checked his chart. She was about to explain what was planned for the morning when Dr. Robert stepped forward. He cleared his throat and began speaking quickly, using technical terms, flipping through the chart without looking up at the patient. Angela listened carefully. She noticed that the patient looked a little lost, perhaps struggling to understand the doctor's complicated explanation. So, she waited for a pause and then spoke softly, turning her attention back to the patient. "What Dr. Robert means," she explained, "is that your tests showed some improvement, and today we'll be running another check just to make sure everything is steady. You'll be safe and comfortable during the process." The patient's face relaxed. "Thank you," he said. "That makes sense now." But before Angela could continue, Dr. Robert frowned and turned toward her. His voice carried a sharp edge. "Nurse, I am the one explaining the treatment," he said firmly. "Please don't interrupt." The room grew quiet for a moment. Angela felt her cheeks grow warm, but she did not let her calm expression change. She simply nodded and stepped back slightly. She had been through moments like this before. She knew the best thing to do was remain professional. The patient glanced between the two of them. His eyes showed surprise at the doctor's tone, but he said nothing. Instead, he leaned back against his pillows and folded his hands, quietly observing. Angela remained steady. She handed the doctor the instruments he needed, wrote down notes on the chart, and ensured that everything was ready for the patient's upcoming test. She moved with quiet efficiency, her actions smooth and precise. Meanwhile, Dr. Robert continued to speak, sometimes to the patient, sometimes more to himself as he muttered medical terms and instructions. At one point, Angela noticed the patient shifting uncomfortably. His expression suggested he wanted to ask a question, but perhaps felt uneasy. Angela leaned forward slightly and asked kindly, "Do you have any concerns or questions, sir? Anything we can explain for you?" The patient smiled at her kindness, but before he could answer, Dr. Robert let out a short sigh. "Nurse," he said sharply, "please don't distract the patient with unnecessary questions. I have already covered everything." Angela felt the sting of the words, but she did not argue. Instead, she gave a small respectful nod and stepped back again. Inside, though, she felt a pang of disappointment. She believed strongly that patients deserved to be heard. Sometimes, a simple question or reassurance made all the difference in their recovery. The patient, however, noticed everything. He noticed the doctor's dismissive tone. He noticed the nurse's quiet grace and professionalism. He noticed the way Angela seemed more focused on his comfort, while the doctor seemed more focused on displaying authority. For the rest of the visit, Angela remained steady, attentive, and respectful. When the patient needed help adjusting his pillow, she was there. When he asked for a sip of water, she quietly brought it to him. She never let the earlier humiliation affect her duty. The patient's eyes followed her with interest. There was a thoughtfulness in his gaze, as though he was making careful judgments. He had not spoken much since the doctor's sharp words, but his silence carried weight. Dr. Robert, meanwhile, seemed unaware. To him, this was just another routine check, another patient on the long list for the day. He finished his notes, gave quick instructions, and then closed the chart. "We're done here," he said, glancing briefly at Angela. "Make sure everything is prepared for the test." "Yes, doctor," Angela replied, her voice calm and professional. As they left the room, Angela allowed herself a small breath. It had not been the first time she had been spoken to harshly in front of a patient. She had learned to carry herself with dignity, no matter how others treated her. What mattered most to her was that the patient felt cared for. But what Angela did not know was that the patient in that room was not just any patient. He was someone with influence, someone who valued respect above all else, and someone who had taken careful note of every word and action in that short encounter. For now, he kept that knowledge to himself, quietly reflecting on what he had just witnessed. And so, while the doctor walked away thinking nothing more of the exchange, and the nurse returned to her duties with quiet strength, the patient lay in bed with a knowing look in his eyes. Something told him that this small moment, this simple incident, would not be forgotten. The hospital moved at its usual rhythm the next day. Nurses hurried through the halls with charts and supplies, doctors rushed from room to room, and patients waited for tests and treatments. Yet inside room 312, where the older man was resting, something deeper lingered. He had witnessed the sharp exchange between Dr. Robert and Nurse Angela the day before. It had stayed with him, not because he was shocked by arrogance, he had seen plenty of that in his long life, but because of how the nurse handled it. Angela had been calm, professional, and composed. She had not argued back, though it was clear she had been spoken to unfairly. She had kept her focus on the patient, not herself. That, to the man, revealed more about her character than any words could. The truth, which neither Angela nor Dr. Robert knew, was that this man was not just an ordinary patient. His name was Mr. Harris, and he was a senior member of the hospital's governing board. Though he looked like just another tired patient in a gown, he held the power to influence policies, careers, and the future of the hospital itself. He had chosen to keep his identity quiet during his treatment because he wanted to see the hospital from the inside, not through reports, but through real experience. As he sat in bed that morning, waiting for his scheduled test, he thought about what he had seen. Respect, kindness, and teamwork mattered to him. In his years on the board, he had often reminded others that hospitals were not only about medicine but also about humanity. Patients came in frightened, confused, and vulnerable. The way staff treated them could shape their healing as much as the treatments themselves. When the door opened, his eyes brightened. It was Nurse Angela again. She entered with her usual warmth, carrying a tray with medicine and a glass of water. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she said with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling today?" He nodded. "Better, thanks to the care here." Angela placed the tray by his side and checked his chart. She explained, step by step, what his schedule looked like for the day when the technicians would arrive, what kind of scan would be done, and how long it would take. She spoke slowly and clearly, making sure he understood each part. Mr. Harris listened carefully. Unlike the day before, when Dr. Roberts' technical language had left him confused, Angela's simple explanations gave him comfort. "You always explain things so clearly," he told her. "It makes it easier." Angela smiled. "That's part of my job, sir. I know hospital terms can sound like another language sometimes. Patients deserve to know what's happening with their own health." Her words carried a sincerity that touched him. He nodded, but inside, he was already comparing her attitude with the doctor's. Just then, the door opened again, and Dr. Robert walked in. He glanced at Angela, then at Mr. Harris, and went straight to the chart. "Vitals look stable," he said, flipping through the notes. "We'll proceed with the scan. Nurse, prepare him." Angela gave a small nod and began arranging the patient's things. She adjusted his pillow, helped him sit comfortably, and checked his foreline. All the while, Dr. Robert muttered instructions without looking up, as though speaking into the air more than to the people around him. "Doctor," Mr. Harris said politely, "can you tell me what the scan is for? I'd like to understand." Dr. Robert glanced at him briefly. "It's to confirm the condition we suspect." "Standard procedure," he said quickly, then returned to his notes. Angela noticed the faint crease in the patient's forehead. She gently explained, "The scan will help us see what's happening inside your chest. It's painless. You'll just lie still for a short time while the machine takes pictures. This will give the doctors a clearer view." Mr. Harris's expression softened. "Ah, I see. Thank you." Dr. Robert paused, narrowing his eyes at Angela. "Nurse, I already answered the question. There's no need to repeat it." Angela lowered her gaze. "Of course, doctor." Mr. Harris said nothing, but he took note. He saw clearly how the doctor dismissed the nurse's effort, even though her explanation had given him the reassurance he needed. The day went on, and Mr. Harris was wheeled into the radiology department. Angela accompanied him, walking by his side. She made small talk to ease his nerves, asking about his family, his hobbies, and how he was feeling overall. Her calm voice filled the silence of the long hallway, and by the time they reached the room, Mr. Harris was smiling faintly. During the scan, Angela stayed nearby, keeping an eye on him. When it was over, she returned him to his room and made sure he was comfortable before stepping out to prepare the paperwork. Later in the afternoon, Dr. Robert returned with the results. He explained them in his usual quick, clipped manner, speaking more to the chart than to the patient. "We'll continue monitoring, but for now, nothing alarming. Nurse, adjust his medication accordingly." Angela listened and made notes. Once Dr. Robert left, she turned to Mr. Harris. She sat by his bed and explained, in plain language, what the results meant, that his condition was stable and that the doctors would keep watching closely to make sure it stayed that way. Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "You have a gift, Nurse Angela," he said quietly. "Not just for nursing, but for making people feel cared for." She smiled warmly. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." For the rest of the day, Mr. Harris thought deeply about everything he had seen. The difference between the doctor and the nurse was clear. One carried knowledge, but also pride. The other carried knowledge, but also humility, kindness, and patience. To him, it was no small difference. It was the very heart of what made a hospital worthy of trust. What Angela did not know was that every time she explained, reassured, or comforted, she was leaving a mark on Mr. Harris's mind. He was quietly making decisions, even as he rested in his hospital bed. As the evening came and the ward grew quieter, Mr. Harris sat back against his pillow. He looked out the window at the fading light and thought to himself, people show their true character when they think no one important is watching. But someone is always watching. And I have seen enough to know where the true heart of this hospital lies. Angela continued her rounds, unaware of the thoughts forming in her patient's mind. Dr. Robert, on the other hand, carried on with his usual confidence, still blind to the impression he was leaving. The stage was quietly being set for something greater than either of them could see. The hospital was quiet that morning except for the steady beeps of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses moving from room to room. In room 312, Mr. Harris sat upright in bed, gazing thoughtfully out the window. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden glow across the floor. He had slept lightly, not because of discomfort, but because his mind was busy with what he had witnessed in the last 2 days. He had seen Nurse Angela's steady kindness, her way of explaining things in simple words, her habit of noticing even small signs of discomfort. He had also seen Dr. Robert's sharpness, his clipped tone, his constant rushing, and the way he brushed aside the very people who supported him. Mr. Harris had been in many important positions in life, but what impressed him most about people was not their titles, it was how they treated others. As he sat in thought, the door opened and Angela walked in. She carried her usual clipboard, but more than that, she carried the same calm energy that seemed to brighten the room. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she said softly. "How did you sleep?" "Not too badly," he replied, smiling faintly. "I think the sunrise looks better from this window than it does at my home." Angela chuckled. "Then at least the view here gives you something nice to enjoy." She checked his chart, adjusted his foreline, and then made sure his blanket was tucked comfortably. Every small action showed her attention to detail. A few minutes later, Dr. Robert entered. He gave a quick nod, glanced at the monitor, and reached for the chart. His voice carried no greeting, only instructions. "Vitals look fine. Nurse, prepare him for another blood test. We'll compare the results with yesterday's scan." Angela nodded and moved to prepare the supplies. Mr. Harris watched closely. He noticed the way Dr. Robert spoke without once looking at him directly, as though the patient were just another name on the list. He also noticed how Angela, even in silence, worked smoothly, double-checking every step to ensure comfort and accuracy. When the blood test was finished, Angela gently pressed the cotton against his arm and taped it neatly. She leaned down slightly. "You may feel a little sore for a short while, but it will pass. Let me know if you feel any discomfort." Mr. Harris smiled. "You always make things clear." Angela returned the smile and stepped aside. Dr. Robert, on the other hand, was already halfway out the door. "I'll review the results later," he called behind him, not waiting for a reply. The room fell quiet again. Angela tidied the table and made sure Mr. Harris had water within reach. He studied her with thoughtful eyes. "May I ask you something, Nurse Angela?" he said after a pause. "Of course," she replied, pulling up the small chair by his bed. "You've worked with Dr. Robert before, haven't you?" Angela hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, several times." "And you never let his tone bother you?" Angela gave a small smile. "I remind myself why I'm here. Patients are often scared, sometimes confused. My role is to help them, not to argue. If I keep my focus on kindness, then his words cannot take away from my purpose." Mr. Harris nodded slowly. Inside, He admired her wisdom. He knew many people who would have let pride or anger get the best of them, but here was a woman who stayed centered, not for herself, but for the sake of others. Later that day, Mr. Harris had visitors, two young relatives who came to see him. They greeted Angela warmly when she came in to check on him. She offered them chairs, made sure they knew where the cafeteria was, and even brought them extra water. She treated them with the same care she showed to every patient and family. When she left the room, one of the visitors leaned close to Mr. Harris. "She's wonderful," the young woman said softly. "Not every nurse is like that. She really listens." Mr. Harris smiled knowingly. He had already seen it. Throughout the day, the pattern repeated. Dr. Robert would sweep in with brisk instructions, focusing on numbers and reports, then leave quickly. Angela would come afterward, filling in the gaps, making sure the patient felt safe and understood. In the afternoon, a small incident occurred. Another nurse from a different ward entered to deliver equipment. She seemed nervous and uncertain about where to place things. Dr. Robert happened to be in the room at the time. "Not there," he said sharply. "Pay attention. Honestly, is it so hard to follow directions?" The young nurse's face turned red. She stumbled with the equipment, nearly dropping it. Angela quickly stepped in, taking the items gently from her hands. "Here, let me help," Angela said kindly. "You can place them on this table, it will be easier for the doctor to reach them." The young nurse looked relieved and whispered, "Thank you," before slipping out of the room. Dr. Robert muttered under his breath, already moving on. But Mr. Harris had seen everything. He noticed how Angela turned a moment of embarrassment into one of reassurance. She had protected the dignity of her fellow nurse, even while under the watch of a critical doctor. As evening approached, Mr. Harris found himself reflecting on the day. Each small act added to the picture forming in his mind. He had seen enough to know the difference between authority and leadership. Authority could command, but leadership inspired. Authority demanded obedience, but leadership earned respect. Angela had no title beyond nurse. Yet she had shown more leadership in these small moments than the doctor with all his years of experience. When Angela returned for the night round, Mr. Harris spoke again. "You must get tired," he said. "So many patients, so much to do." She laughed softly. "It can be tiring, yes. But when a patient smiles, or when they feel better because of something I did, it gives me strength. That's why I chose this path." Her words echoed in his mind long after she left. By the time the lights dimmed and the ward settled into quiet, Mr. Harris was certain of one thing: true care could not be measured in charts or reports. It lived in the heart of those who served. And as he drifted into sleep, he thought to himself, "Soon enough, people will know who I am. And when they do, the truth about this nurse will shine brighter than any title." The morning air in the hospital was quiet and soft, carrying the faint smell of antiseptic mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee from the cafeteria. Room 312, where Mr. Harris had been resting for several days, felt different that day. There was a sense of anticipation, though the staff going about their work had no idea why. Mr. Harris himself seemed calm, but inside he had already made decisions that would affect more than just his own treatment. Angela arrived that morning carrying her clipboard and a warm smile. She greeted Mr. Harris with her usual kindness, asking how he had slept and if he had any discomfort. He smiled faintly in reply. "Better than yesterday. I think I'm starting to understand how much effort goes into taking care of patients." Angela shook her head modestly. "It's all part of the job. Every patient deserves attention, comfort, and care." Mr. Harris watched her, noting how gracefully she moved around the room. She checked the 4-line, adjusted the pillow, and explained the day's schedule. Even when she spoke to him, her eyes were patient, encouraging, and full of understanding. Later that morning, Dr. Robert entered the room with his usual briskness. He flipped through the chart, giving quick instructions about the patient's medications and upcoming tests. His tone remained sharp, and he rarely looked directly at Mr. Harris or Angela. Angela prepared everything as instructed, quietly following the doctor's directions while keeping her attention on Mr. Harris's comfort. She explained each step to him in simple language, ensuring he understood what was happening. After a few minutes, Mr. Harris spoke up. "Angela," he said, "I have something I need to share with both of you." Angela's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Yes, sir." Dr. Robert glanced at him impatiently. "Make it quick," he said, expecting it to be a trivial question. Mr. Harris smiled gently. "I haven't introduced myself properly. My name is Mr. Harris, and I am a member of the hospital board." Angela froze for a moment, her eyes widening in surprise. She had always treated patients with respect, but this revelation added a new layer to the moment. Dr. Roberts' eyes widened slightly, though he quickly tried to mask it. I see," he said, his voice faltering just slightly. Mr. Harris continued. "I have been observing the care provided here during my stay. I wanted to see the hospital from the inside, to understand how the staff work together and how patients are treated." Angela nodded, maintaining her calm composure. She had always believed that care was about action, not recognition, but this acknowledgement filled her with quiet satisfaction. Mr. Harris turned his gaze to Dr. Robert. "And I have noticed something important. I have observed how each of you interacts with patients and staff. There is one nurse in particular whose dedication, kindness, and professionalism stand out clearly." Angela felt her heart race, but she remained seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Angela," Mr. Harris said, his voice warm and sincere, "your patience, attention, and humility have been remarkable. You have treated every patient with dignity, explained everything in a way they can understand, and supported your colleagues even when faced with harsh words. That is the kind of care this hospital should celebrate." Dr. Roberts' face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He realized that the very person he had dismissed, belittled, and underestimated had earned the respect and recognition of someone who had the power to make significant decisions. Angela, however, did not let the moment change her. She remained poised and professional, allowing Mr. Harris to continue. "You, Dr. Robert," Mr. Harris said carefully, "have knowledge and experience, which are valuable. But I must remind all staff that authority does not excuse rudeness or arrogance. Respect and teamwork are essential in a hospital. Patients notice how staff treat each other, and it affects their experience and their recovery." Dr. Robert finally found his voice, but it was quieter and more hesitant than usual. I understand," he said, glancing at Angela. There was a faint trace of humility in his tone, though it seemed forced. Mr. Harris nodded. "I hope this serves as a reminder that we are all here for the patients first. Recognition and praise are important, but what matters most is how you treat others, both colleagues and patients alike." Angela's lips curved into a small smile. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot," she said softly. After this revelation, Mr. Harris continued his treatment as usual, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was a new sense of awareness. Dr. Robert moved with more care, choosing his words more thoughtfully, while Angela continued to offer her support and kindness. Throughout the day, word of the acknowledgement spread quietly among the staff. Nurses who had long admired Angela for her dedication felt a sense of pride and validation. Even newer staff who had not yet experienced her care personally began to take notice, realizing the true meaning of professionalism and compassion. By the afternoon, Mr. Harris had requested a short meeting with hospital management. Angela accompanied him, standing respectfully to the side, allowing him to speak freely. He shared his observations of the ward, emphasizing the importance of teamwork, respect, and patient-centered care. He specifically praised Angela's example, highlighting how her actions demonstrated the highest standards of nursing. Management listened carefully. They recognized that his feedback was not just a compliment, but also a call to action. Policies would be reviewed, and staff would be reminded that respect and humility were essential components of effective health care. Later, back in his room, Mr. Harris reflected on the day. He had always believed that the true measure of a hospital's quality was in how it treated its most vulnerable people. Today, he had seen that standard met, thanks to the dedication of a nurse who had quietly, consistently, and gracefully carried out her responsibilities. Angela returned for the evening rounds. She checked on Mr. Harris with the same warmth she had shown since his admission. He smiled, feeling confident that his message had been heard and that positive change would follow. "You've made a difference, not only for me but for the hospital as a whole," he said quietly. Angela shook her head gently. "I'm just doing my job, sir. I care about my patients. That's all that matters." Mr. Harris looked at her with a knowing smile. "Sometimes, doing your job the right way is the most powerful thing you can do." As night fell, the ward grew quiet once more. The patients rested, and the staff moved calmly through the halls. For Angela, it was another day of dedicated care. For Dr. Robert, it was a humbling moment of reflection. And for Mr. Harris, it was a day that confirmed his belief in the power of kindness, respect, and professionalism. The seeds of change had been planted. And though no one could know what the future held, one thing was clear: the hospital had witnessed the quiet strength of a nurse who would forever be remembered for her compassion, her patience, and her unwavering commitment to care. The hospital felt different the next morning. There was a quiet energy in the halls, an almost invisible shift that those who worked there could feel but not fully explain. Word had quietly spread about the events in room 312, the recognition of a nurse's dedication, the lesson in respect learned by a senior doctor, and the presence of a patient who had quietly observed everything. While most staff went about their duties, the atmosphere carried a subtle sense of accountability, hope, and renewed professionalism. Angela walked through the ward, her usual clipboard in hand, greeting patients with her warm smile. She had no idea how far her quiet actions had reached. She focused on her work as always, checking vitals, adjusting equipment, and comforting patients who seemed anxious or in pain. For her, care was never about recognition, it was about helping people feel safe and understood. In room 312, Mr. Harris sat comfortably, reading a small book. He had rested well the previous night, reflecting on the changes he had seen in the ward. The doctor, the staff, and even the younger nurses had all begun to notice the importance of patience, kindness, and respectful communication. He felt confident that this small but meaningful ripple would grow into something bigger for the hospital. As Angela entered, he looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I expected," he replied. "I think I've witnessed something remarkable in this hospital." Angela tilted her head slightly, curious. "Oh. You have shown, day after day, what it means to truly care. Not just about the tasks, but about the people you serve," he said. "Your patience, professionalism, and kindness have set an example for everyone here. Even the senior doctor has started to notice what matters most." Angela blushed slightly but remained composed. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Just then, Dr. Robert entered the room. There was a subtle change in his demeanor. His movements were less hurried, his voice less sharp. He greeted Mr. Harris politely and offered a genuine, though small, smile toward Angela. Though his pride was still present, there was a hint of humility that had not been there before. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," he said. "We'll review your latest test results now." As Dr. Robert spoke, Angela quietly took notes and observed the patient's reactions. She noticed that the doctor's tone was different, more thoughtful, more patient. Mr. Harris nodded approvingly. He could see the change, small but meaningful, in the way the staff interacted. After the review, Dr. Robert addressed the nurse. "Angela, your assistance has been helpful. Your explanations to the patient made a difference," he said carefully. Angela gave a polite nod. "Thank you, doctor." She did not let the praise distract her from the work at hand, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, she saw a genuine recognition from someone who had once been dismissive. Later that day, Mr. Harris requested a short meeting with the hospital board and management. Angela accompanied him, standing respectfully by his side. During the meeting, Mr. Harris spoke about what he had observed during his stay. He highlighted the importance of teamwork, clear communication, and above all, respect for both patients and colleagues. When he spoke of Angela, he emphasized how her quiet professionalism had left a lasting impression. "This nurse demonstrates the highest standards of care," he said. "She treats patients with dignity, explains everything clearly, and supports her colleagues even under pressure. Her example should be recognized and celebrated." The board listened intently. They nodded, understanding the significance of what Mr. Harris had witnessed. Policies would be reviewed, and the hospital would remind staff that respect, patience, and empathy were essential components of quality care. After the meeting, Angela returned to her duties. She continued to care for her patients as she always had, but there was a quiet change in the ward. Other nurses had begun to follow her example. Young staff who had not yet learned the importance of patience and kindness now had a living example to look up to. Even Dr. Roberts' behavior had subtly shifted. He was more aware of his tone and words, more conscious of the impact of his actions. In the following weeks, Angela received formal recognition for her dedication. A small ceremony was held where she was praised for her professionalism, her kindness, and her unwavering commitment to patient care. Colleagues congratulated her warmly, and even Dr. Robert acknowledged her contributions publicly, offering a sincere apology for his previous behavior. Angela accepted the recognition with grace. She reminded everyone that care was about action, not applause, but there was no denying that her efforts had made a tangible difference in the hospital's culture. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris continued his own recovery. He observed the ward with satisfaction, noting the subtle improvements in teamwork and respect among staff. The lessons he had intended to deliver through observation had been received. The hospital had learned, in its own way, that every action mattered, that small acts of kindness could ripple into broader change, and that respect was not optional, it was essential. One evening, as Angela finished her rounds and prepared to leave, Mr. Harris called her over. "Angela," he said softly, "thank you for everything. You have not only cared for me but reminded this hospital of what truly matters. You have set a standard that everyone here should follow." Angela smiled warmly. "I only did what I believe every nurse should do," she said humbly. He shook his head, smiling. "No, you did more than that. You reminded us all that professionalism is about heart as much as skill. That lesson will be remembered long after I leave." As she left the room, Angela felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had spent her career serving others, and now she had seen that those small, consistent acts of care had not gone unnoticed. She realized that true impact did not come from recognition or status, but from unwavering dedication and compassion. Dr. Robert, meanwhile, reflected privately on the changes that had occurred. He had learned a lesson in humility and the importance of respecting every member of the healthcare team. It was a lesson he would carry with him, guiding his interactions with both patients and staff in the future. By the end of the week, the ward had a renewed energy. Patients felt safer and more comfortable. Staff treated one another with greater respect. The hospital had embraced a culture of care that balanced expertise with humanity, authority with humility, and knowledge with compassion. Angela continued her rounds, quietly making the world of each patient a little brighter. Her example inspired others, showing that true leadership could come from anyone willing to serve with patience and kindness. And as Mr. Harris prepared to leave the hospital, he knew that the impact of these few days would last. A nurse's quiet dedication had changed more than just one patient's experience, it had reshaped the culture of the hospital itself. For Angela, it was simply another day of doing what she loved. But for everyone who witnessed her care, it was a powerful reminder that respect, kindness, and professionalism were the true measure of excellence in any place of healing. The hospital had learned its lesson. And thanks to one nurse's quiet strength and one patient's careful observation, the culture of respect and empathy had been strengthened in a way that would continue to affect lives for years to come.